In this section, we're going to look at some basic ways that a sequence is framed or shot. If you think back to Méliès's Voyage to the Moon, we can imagine that the action on screen is painted on a vertical plane. The space where the characters are standing is a perpendicular horizontal plane, and the action, while viewed on a flat surface, appears as a three-dimensional cube, where the characters move within the left, right, bottom, and front or fourth walls. Méliès's film, like other early Hollywood movies, is similar to a theatrical performance with an audience. The camera is therefore positioned from the point of view of a member of the audience, framing the entirety of the action within the four sides of the front plane. Of course, in 1902, a contemporary vocabulary to describe this shot, since there isn't much diversity to compare and to define it by. However, in retrospect, we can call this long shot or establishing shot in sequence, as we see in Méliès's film. When a character exits to the left of the shot, we expect the character to enter from the right side of the next. If they exit from the left side of the screen and enter the next shot from the left, it appears as if the characters have left and returned to a new setting. This doesn't make sense visually. In Sherlock Jr., we see several examples when Buster Keaton's character breaks these rules to critique the medium for comic effect. Now that we have some idea of how basic shot sequencing works, we can further complicate things and start moving the camera. From the point of view of the audience member at a play, the distance between you and the visual plane can vary, depending on how much you spend on the tickets or personal preference. Therefore, in the nosebleed sections at something like Mozart's Magic Flute, it may be difficult to see Pamina's reaction to her mother's demands that she murders Saristro. To account for this distance, like me, you might own a pair of gold ruby-studded opera glasses with a carved ivory handle to help see the performer's facial expression, but it's likely you don't. Knowing this, the performance manager can do a few things to correct the problem. They might instruct the actors to be more expressive with exaggerated facial expressions or body language. In the Magic Flute, for example, Mozart uses an upper register staccato during the Queen of the Night aria to reflect the fierce tone of the Queen's request and her daughter's response. In film, the solution is a little bit more simple. The director can just move the camera. In Sherlock Jr., when Keaton's character is describing the shape of a dollar bill to the woman outside the movie theater, the camera has been moved closer to the two actors. The close shot or medium shot serves to isolate the two actors from their surroundings, focusing attention on their interaction or dialogue. This is called a medium shot. When Keaton silently gestures to the woman, the camera moves in closer, so all we can see is her reaction, otherwise known as a close-up. Or if it is being used specifically to illustrate a character's reaction, we call it a reaction shot. In sequence, we can expect a long establishing shot to familiarize us with the spatial relationship of the characters, a medium shot that tells us they are interacting, and the close-up to show each character's reaction. If at any time the setting changes or the characters move, the filmmaker might reestablish that spatial relation with a long medium shot. Things can get quite a bit more complicated than this, and the following terms illustrate the increasing complexity, as well as how the wide, medium, and close-ups are broken into other specific shots for other specific reasons. Beyond this, one development that sets film apart from its theatrical ancestor was the Kuleshov effect, developed by Russian filmmaker Lev Kuleshov. The National Film Institute vaguely defines the Kuleshov effect as the idea that two shots in sequence are more impactful than a single shot by itself. More specifically, the Kuleshov effect describes the psychological reading of a sequence of shots. Even if that psychological reading is not explicit, in the example sequence, we are presented with a close-up of a man's blank expression, followed by an image of food, a woman on a couch, or a child in a coffin. The man's expression never changes, and there's no evidence that he's in proximity to each subsequent object. However, the viewer connects this association, the associated emotion, hunger, lust, sadness, with the man's face. In my early example from Méliès's film, the characters exits from the left side of the visual plane, the shot cuts to a second setting and the character enters from the right side of the screen. The relationship between those two settings is implied by the character's movement between them. In our minds, that simple continuity horizontally doubles the visual plane. If we examine both as if they were both photographed and laid edge to edge, that character's continuity creates a panorama in our optical unconsciousness. This is the same reason why a cut to motion in an action movie can amplify the impact of a punch that was never thrown. Alfred Hitchcock in Psycho used this type of editing in his famous shower scene. The scene is established when we see Anthony Perkins' silhouette appear in the curtain behind Janet Leigh, telling the audience that these two characters are in the same space. We see Perkins pull back the shower curtain without seeing Leigh, but we know they are both in the bathroom. In a third shot, Leigh screams. While separately these two images in sequence are unrelated, we assume that the screaming is in response to the curtain being pulled. Afterwards, Perkins swings the knife downwards so it exits the bottom of the screen, which cuts on this motion. In the next shot, the knife enters from the top of the screen with Leigh framed behind it. The connection our mind makes based on this sequence is that Perkins is stabbing Leigh, when in reality the individual parts out of sequence aren't indicative of this relationship. The continuity of the sequence connects them. The only difference between this type of editing and what we might see in a Jason Bourne film is the speed at which these jump cuts happen. In post-classical editing, the speed of the montage editing increases the intensity of the impact of each motion. Finally, returning to Hitchcock's shower sequence. If you had to describe this sequence, you might say that a nude woman is being violently stabbed to death while in the shower. This is exactly what the motion picture production censors saw prior to the release of the film. They argued that one of Leigh's breasts could be seen on screen and that the opening shot of the toilet was vulgar. Upon appealing the production code claim, Hitchcock was able to show there was no nudity in the sequence, but famously kept the toilet. But Alex, why is the toilet such a big deal? You're probably asking. Well, let's talk a little about the history of cinematic censorship. You might remember seeing the title cards at the beginning of Sherlock Jr. that read "Passed by the National Board of Review." The National Board of Review of Motion Pictures was originally the New York Board of Motion Picture Censorship, a group of government censors who would review a film against decency laws prior to its release. To avoid further government censorship, the National Board of Review was formed as a way of the industry to self-regulate outside of the government purview. Today, the Motion Picture Association serves a similar purpose, creating our modern rating system and lobbying for the film industry. The NRB was the first and the MPAA was the last. However, in the 1930s, the Production Code, or Hays Code, controlled motion picture censorship. The Hays Code was the result of a moral panic in the United States prior to the Great Depression. In 1930, it was therefore controlled by the Big Five Hollywood oligopoly, which include Paramount, Columbia, Fox Film Corporation, Universal, and Warner Brothers, prior to being broken up under antitrust laws in a 1948 case, United States versus Paramount Pictures. Ironically, Walt Disney was the primary proponent of breaking up this monopoly control of these studios, and his actions are, in works by Walter Benjamin, Theodor Adorno, often compared to Hitler's deconstruction of the Weimar Republic while serving as chancellor in the 1930s. But that's a topic for later in the semester. The Production Code Board consisted of representatives of religious organizations as well as members of these large film studios. The actual Hays Code rules were a blend of religious moral rules and industry gatekeeping, which often took the form of obvious racial inequities. To list a few early examples, the code prohibited pointed profanity, sex perversion, white slavery, miscegenation or interracial marriage, ridicule of the clergy, sympathy for criminals, man and woman in bed together, and the institution of marriage, sex, and shared toilets. While it may be apocryphal, in 2004, The Aviator, a scene depicts Howard Hughes, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, is seen appealing a production code ruling that the length of Jane Russell's cleavage in The Outlaw was vulgar. By comparing her bosom length to the photographs of other actresses from other approved films, this type of censorship would continue until the early 60s, when skillful editing like Psycho had disarmed the authority of the censors.